through better engagement, you can go through and do something about. Brands can be differentiate themselves, but ultimately today they're kind of limited by technology. And our e-commerce platform basically enables you to kind of complement search and also now provide a browse function. And a browse function that actually, if you look at your customers, is likely to represent a significant number of your customers. That's a kind of example. Any questions? Some sounds. Yeah, sorry. We need, in terms of hospitality, in terms of hotels, the gentleman was asking was that where you've got a smaller amount of product, how do you go through and convert them? And this is in the hospitality hotel arena. The first thing to say is that if I go back to that kind of chart that I kind of showed earlier, then that chart, then in the case of our experience in terms of travel, then your conversions typically sit at the kind of, do 2%, you're actually doing quite well, you know, compared to retail accounts, because the decision making is often a high value decision making. It's not the kind of thing you do on a regular basis. You will end up coming back and doing research. So that's the first thing to go through and recognise is where do you sit for your sector. And again, that comes back to, for anybody who's sitting out there and thinking, well, hang on a minute, these numbers are woefully low or high compared to what I can achieve, then you have to understand it relative to your sector, and we can tell you that. In terms of product, however, one of our clients, a couple of our clients, Keone and Superbreaks, for instance, we actually do spend a lot of time adding content. So in other words, what we do know, for instance, is that typically 50% of people who book online will have actually visited the site 14 to 29 days earlier. And the reason they come back to your site is because there's more information on that particular hotel than others. So my immediate advice to you would be is that your investment is both in terms of photography, but it's also in terms of information. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Any other questions? Sorry, John. The question is asked the balance between use of lifestyle photography and kind of product sales. First of all, you have to look at every business in its own right. In other words, the level of turnover you're making relative to an investment. So in other words, for those people who have not invested in lifestyle photography, it is a kind of big ask. A number of things kind of anecdotally without kind of giving client information away. First of all, historically, if you look at mail order companies, for instance, then the way that and I can give you a good example of this, if they hadn't invested in model photography, they wouldn't have a mail order business. You have to inspire the customer. Interestingly, Very, who was part of, which was Littlewoods Direct, launched a catalogue about 18 months ago, which was under the Very brand, which actually did, and they presented product as thumbnails, actually in the catalogue, and it bombed. It was terrible. Kind of heads rolled as a consequence of that. And they went back to the traditional investment of photography. In terms of, I think as well, if we look at ASOS, for example, ASOS made that move just over 2.5 years ago, and now all their product is done in that fashion. So I think it's also a case of you've got to get to a certain level to go through and justify it, but you do get a return. House of Fraser is another example. House of Fraser also have done A/B testing to be able to do that comparison, and they've seen a significant uplift. I think it's very much a case of you have to, as I kind of illustrated earlier, is a roadmap of things you must be doing, and therefore on that basis you go through an investment return. But certainly everybody who's done that has seen an uplift as a consequence of it. And it does you know, I also believe that retailers in the high street, they may sell clothes, but they're actually all fundamentally different. They have to understand their particular customer. And the great value that modern photography brings is it allows you to allow that customer to associate themselves with product and styles. It's not the easiest thing to do, but if you get it right, you definitely does it. That's
what about commoditized products compared to lifestyle products? So you've got products that you're showing here, which is post-fashion lifestyle products.
Yeah.
So mainly the retailers got a brand and a brand equity. Would you say commoditized products, say like consumer electronics?
Yes.
Do you have the same opinion, or would you say you treat customers slightly differently?
Did you hear the question that's been asked? Basically, the question that's been asked is, do you treat commoditized products, electrical items, etc., different to this style of presentation, given the fact that actually, the brands are often strong in the high street? There's two things to go through and consider. Proportion of our revenues are earned from online advertising, and if I look at the online advertising spend, it's shifted in the last few years. So we spend less on brand terms, we spend more on product terms. So, and it comes as a consequence of, if you like, customers actually searching for product as opposed to brand. And increasingly, if you kind of take yourself forward as well, from a brand point of view, then brand increasingly has always had to communicate itself, because there will always be a smaller player, a niche player, looking to kind of take your audience away. So you can't always guarantee, brand for me still has to sit on the website. In answer to your question about the kind of commoditized, definitely. I wouldn't necessarily present electrical items in this space. An obvious example is fridges. It's the white boxes. What becomes more important in those cases is to have the good refine and the kind of search criteria. I must admit in this presentation I may be able to go through all of those in detail, but certainly one of the things that, and I hope you kind of attempted to touch on it here, was that if you compare these methods, then actually they're quite immature still. Because the problem is that actually what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the customer to make some decisions in order for you to render products on the first page. The problem is with that is if you overly complicate it, then actually they do spend proportionally more time trying to work out how to use your tool, which is obviously different to everybody else, as opposed to looking at product. So this is a real problem area, and that's why from our point of view, we've kind of said, well, this solution complements the solution. It's not instead of, it's to do both.
Depends on the customer is the life cycle.
It does indeed, absolutely. And I think the thing that that we've certainly learned is that to a certain extent, technology, we've been driven by technology as opposed to what the customer wants. And we certainly found that when we started to take a customer view, in other words, that hunter buyer and browser, then actually we looked at it completely differently. Our solutions started to change overnight as we started to go through and look at it in this way. And I genuinely believe if you look at your customers in that way, and you look at it from an advertising point of view, yeah, so a pay-per-click advertising, I can deliver you a buyer, but actually it's a small volume, relatively speaking. It might be good, but actually the more difficult customer to convert, to recruit, is that browser. And therefore, the issue is, well, how do you make sure you provide a solution that meets each of those particular criteria? Does that answer your question? Yeah? Sorry, sir.
What I'm interested in is the iPhone.
Yeah.
Very good point. Are you designing separate websites or advising selling on websites to then take it out for use of iPhones?
Yes. The thing about first of all, you've got to bear in mind with if you like online shopping, we've kind of